I'll give you a little bit of information about our speaker before I bring her up here and have her start on her presentation. So our speaker today is Lorrie Primeaux, and she is the Analog Science Lead for the Research Operations and Integration Group at JSC. ROI is funded by the Human Research Program and performs research in both flight as well as analogs to address and answer the risks and the gaps associated with human spaceflight. Lorrie joined NASA in 2003 as an experiment support coordinator, say that 10 times real fast, in the Cellular Biotechnology Group under the Biological Systems Office, where she supported cell science experiments for shuttle and station. When the Biotechnology Systems Office closed in 2005, she made the move to analogs as an integration coordinator. At that time, analogs mainly consisted of bed rest studies at UTMB Galveston, where subjects were placed in a 6-degree head-down tilt for up to 90 days. Since then, she has fulfilled multiple roles in analogs, including project planning and support lead, operations lead, project manager, and she now serves as the analog science lead, where she coordinates and manages the strategic plan for analog research requirements for the HRP elements. I also have to add that she put up with me as her NASA lead for about 4 years. Poor thing. Analogs 2 has grown with the team supporting multiple platforms around the world in support of HRP's goals. Analogs support not only bed rest studies, but also isolated, confined, and controlled, isolated, confined, and extreme environments, and parabolic flight campaigns. Lorrie is the second person in her family to join the NASA world, somewhat following in her dad's footsteps, but as a scientist instead of as an engineer. She is the proud parent of 2, a daughter and a son, and who knows, perhaps one of them will have the pleasure of becoming the 3rd generation to carry on her family tradition. So I'd like to introduce you to Lorrie Primeaux. Okay, I am going to turn it over to Lorrie.
Hello, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Lorrie Primeaux, as Lisa said. Thank you for inviting me to present to you today. It's been a while because of COVID since I've stood up in front of a group and presented, so hopefully I won't boggle it up too terribly much for you guys this afternoon. So this is actually, the picture on the top screen, just to let you know, is actually an image of the HERA, Human Exploration Research Analog that we own and operate. So human spaceflight research is actually an integral part of NASA's goal of making the mission that they're going to Moon and Mars. Without the Human Spaceflight Research Program, we're not going to be able to identify the risks associated and mitigate those risks associated with spaceflight. So what are the spaceflight hazards and risks that we're facing? So obviously there's an altered gravity environment. So you're looking at changes and impacts to your vestibular functioning, your fluid shifts, cardiovascular deconditioning, muscle atrophy, bone loss. There's distance from Earth, so you've got comm delays going on, limited ability to supply and rescue in the case that there's an issue. It drives the need for more autonomous operations and medical care capacity, which is something we really need to look at. We're learning all about that now in our current HERA mission. Hostile enclosed environments, vehicle and habitat design, accelerated vibration and noise, environmental levels, exposures, water, food, toxic exposures, decreased immune function, isolation and confinement, behavioral health, sensory deprivation, sleep disorders, team communication, coordination, and adaptation. Space radiation is there. That's a very real concern. There's a whole other element that deals specifically with space radiation. However, we are not able to address that risk and gap because the IRB just won't let us radiate our test subjects inside of our facility. So what are flight analogs? So they are environments that produce similar effects on the human body as those experienced in space flight. So different analog facilities and platforms will have different effects on the human body. So we have a platform to address the physiological changes. So those would be the bed rest studies. So as you mentioned earlier, bed rest studies are a 6-degree head down tilt that will have the same physiological effects on the human body as microgravity environment. The isolated, confined, and controlled or extreme environments, you're looking at that isolation. And so you're looking at a lot of your human factors, you're looking at your psychological factors, your teaming, those types of things. Parabolic will give you some of the microgravity experience as well, although in a much shorter duration. Experimentally test. So we use these analogs to simulate, like I said, gravity. We're also looking at comm delay, food systems, crew size, your volume, your habitat, what's important, what's not as you're developing these new vehicles and habitats. We also use it to help us identify, develop, and validate countermeasures. So analogs are a great platform to validate science that someone's coming up with before it moves on to flight. We're also able to integrate multiple studies on a non-interference basis with one another and run them together in one experiment or campaign. So for instance, in HERA, we're able to integrate up to 20 investigators at a time in one campaign. So at the end of a calendar year, we've yielded an N of 16 instead of just an N of, maybe 3. So why not just a spaceflight? Like I just mentioned, you get a larger N throughput time. We don't have the time to get all this research that we need done on station. So we get that larger throughput in a much shorter duration because astronaut crew time is limited. There's not a whole lot of life left in station, but we have a whole lot of questions before we go to the moon and Mars. Cost. It's very expensive to launch hardware and return biosamples and everything back to Earth. So analogs is kind of like that proving ground, like I was saying. So you got an investigator and they have an idea that they want to test. So they're going to validate in their lab and they're like, okay, I'm ready for spaceflight. Let's go. Well, you might be ready for spaceflight, but does your stuff really work? So how are we going to find that out? Let's see what we can do with it. So they'll often give it to us and we will implement it whichever platform is most suitable. That's kind of part of my job to figure out where the science needs to go, makes the most sense. And we will run it through. And I will say that over the years, we have seen experiments that worked great. Yes, yay, verily, you were good. Let's, expend the money and the time and send you to flight. We've also seen experiments where we're like, yeah, not so much. You kind of need to go back to the drawing board and start over. So it's definitely a great platform to do that validation before we spend the time, effort, and money to go to flight. We also get an awful lot of control. When you're running an analog here on the ground, you can control just about everything that test subject is going to experience. Depending the amount of control that you implement is pretty much going to depend on the science that you're trying to collect, what the researcher is requesting and wants to see, but we can literally, control just about anything that happens to that subject given the right platform. Kind of gives us a lot of power. So here's a quick picture. Probably most of this presentation is going to be about the HERA, the Human Exploration Research Analog, mainly because HRP owns this platform. It's been given to Flight Analogs to run and operate, and we literally do everything from this, from facility maintenance, recruiting subjects, finding the subjects, training, screening, putting them in, maintaining the operations. We do everything. Like I said, it's just right down the street, building 220 right around the corner. So we do everything for this platform, extremely involved from start to finish. So this is pretty much what it looks like. It's a general overview. So we've got 3 main components. We've got an airlock, which currently does not function as a true airlock because we're not outside in an extreme environment. We have a core and loft area. So the downstairs area is usually their workstation. Upstairs area is more their living space. The top part of the upstairs area is the loft. That's where their crew quarters are, their bunks. And then we have a hygiene module. Yes, it's a very big hygiene module. No vehicle is ever going to have a bathroom that big, but we have taken steps with the human factors folks to reduce the perceivable volume inside that hygiene module. And we do have some freedom to control some of the parameters and amenities that we have inside the hygiene module that you might not see in spaceflight. And then over on the other side is our mission control. Like I said, we control everything, even mission operations. So we have built our own mission control system, and it is right in building 220 with the HERA. And that's just a quick snapshot of one of our stations. And we do support that 24/7 every time we have a crew inside the habitat. So this is the core level. This is the first level. This is where the crew spends the vast majority of their wake day downstairs doing all the science activities that we have planned for them. So when you walk in the front door, to your immediate left, which is the blue table there, it's just a general all-purpose work table. So any type of activities that they have that requires a clean surface for them to function and work on, like robotic experiment, etc., they use that table. Also, kind of surrounding that area is parts of our simulated ecosystem that we have inside of the facility. Right past that is the airlock. As he mentioned, they use the airlock for the virtual reality EVAs. That is one of the activities that we have. It's one of the few performance activities that we have that involve all 4 of our crew members together. That airlock is also used for our private family medical and psychological conferences. It's one of the few places inside the hearing that you can actually go shut a door and have total privacy. So they often go in there for their medical and family conferences. We also use it for blood draws. So I know on station, crew is trained to draw blood on each other. However, we don't actually get these crew members in enough time to train anyone how to draw blood. And I don't think anyone wants someone who just learned 16 days ago how to take a blood draw to stick a needle in them, especially there's a sleep deprivation protocol inside the hab. So we have isolated, confined, and controlled environment, right? So you can't send anybody in there either. So we developed the phlebotomot. So in that airlock, there is a rod that goes across with a curtain that splits our airlock in half. So before the crew goes to bed the night before a blood draw, they will set up the airlock that will pull that curtain. The following morning, they will come in with a spotter, so 2 crew members at a time, one who's sitting down, will place their arm through a curtain to the phlebotomot, who will draw their blood strictly by hands touch signals, so no visual or verbal communication with the phlebotomist at all. Now, keep in mind, we do have 9 video surveillance cameras inside the hab, so I guarantee you Mission Control is watching this process the entire time. So in the event that there is an issue, we are able to see it and address it. Of course, the phlebotomist is able to give us signals as well to let us know that there's a problem. The spotter is mainly there for 2 reasons. One, just in case the crew member has a problem, maybe gets a little woozy, needs to sit down, but also so the person receiving the blood draw can communicate with their spotter. So think comments like, oh, well, you know, that kind of hurts a little bit, or, oh, that's pinching a little bit. So that feedback is what the phlebotomist is using to adjust or make any changes to the blood draw. So that is phlebotomot. It's served us very well so far. We've had some changes in the software here and there, so some of them work better than others, but it is a learning process. So then come back out of the airlock. Right past that, conveniently enough, is our medical workstation. It actually does have a gurney that can pull out from the medical workstation if absolutely needed. We've never had to use it to date, which is a good thing. We should probably knock on wood for that. We do multiple experiments. So there's a nice little work table there. We often have animal experiments that are there, maybe some plant growth experiments. We do have a working first aid kit, which was a huge obstacle here at NASA. For those of you, I guess all of you have worked here, you know that if you stub your toe, you have to go to the clinic. Well, that really wasn't an option for us because we can't let the crew out and we can't let the doctor in. So we're like, can you please just, agree to provide us a first aid kit that will give us some medications, some bandages, just to treat minor illnesses and injuries. And so they agreed to do so. We do have a medical monitor that's on call 24/7 supporting our operations. So in the event that something more serious happens, we do have the capability to address that as well. Right past that, where you see another door, there's no longer a door in that area. Instead, we kind of turned it into a transfer station, if you will. There's also a glove box there. I think we'll have a good picture of this in our next slide. The glove box is used to do geological assessments because when they're on their EVAs, they're going to collect samples right from the surface, and so they have to come back and inspect those samples. So we have a glove box for them to do that. But we also have some compartments above and below that glove box that allows for us to do a two-way transition between MCC and the crew if needed. So it's mainly there for emergency use only. Anytime we use that transfer station, it is considered a break in isolation. So we try to limit its use, but we needed to have a way in the event some piece of critical hardware or software was malfunctioning, we could pull it out and address it or push through a backup. And or if there was a medical issue that needed additional medication or care, we could have a way to get it to the crew member. So we do have that. The brown station right after that is where our MMSEV operates. So that is the vehicle that has the 2 crew members that go around on the EVA. So we have a pilot and a co-pilot that sit there, and they're driving the MMSE vehicle. Right now, we were going to the Mars Moon Phobos. So they're taking our crew members to Phobos, and then the crew members are out. Like I said, they're over in the airlock with their VR goggles on, and so they're doing their EVA out there while the pilot and co-pilot are driving their vehicle. So that's the station there. And then there's the door to the hygiene module. Used to be much more luxurious until the human factors people came in and said, this is way too big, you need to reduce the space. And so we put up a whole bunch of fancy walls. They also came in and said, there's too much, privacy in this place, let's change that. So they've now taken the door off our hygiene module. So there's no longer a door on the hygiene module. We've put a curtain in front of the toilet. There's a curtain at the shower, and that's it. So theoretically, we can have 3 people in our hygiene module all at once, and it's perfectly fine, right? So I'm not sure any of them have tested that theory yet, but theoretically you could do it. Right outside the hygiene module, we have the robot. So this is a simulation for the Canadarm. So it's the grappling maneuvers. That's a behavioral measure as well that we're using. It's an individual behavioral measure instead of the T measure like the MMSEV and EVA to help gauge performance. Not shown here, there's a little tiny station right next to that little green man. And we have a 3D printer, and that's inside the hab in the event that the crew needs a tool or something that was mistakenly not placed inside here, or if they've lost something and they need something, they are able to produce and print that tool to get them on their way. And now, maybe.
Old man or old women?
Pardon?
The crew member, old man or old women?
50-50.
Really?
Not for all missions necessarily. Our goal is always 50-50 for an entire campaign. So the whole N of 16 will strive for a 50-50 split. Each campaign has 4 missions of 4. So every mission may not have a 50-50 split, but we hope when you're all said and done that you end up with that 50-50. So right now we have an all-female crew inside the habitat. We've had all males, 3 males, 1 female, whatever. But at the end, our goal is to have 8 of each. So this is another little look inside, just so you can kind of see if I can drag and, maybe I can't drag and drop in here. Nope. Okay, he's not going to drag and drop. So, and I don't know if it actually, there it goes. So there's the MMSEV station. So that's where the pilot and the co-pilot are. Here's our glove box. I don't know how I got those people down there. Yes.
When one crew leaves and another crew comes in, does the crew have to do all the cleanup when they leave and come back? Or is there a crew that comes in and does that for them?
So we do have maintenance, just like you would in any vehicle that you're in. So the crew is expected to do a certain level of vehicle maintenance, habitat maintenance while they're in there. But we do not have them scrub down everything and completely get it. We do have a cleaning service that comes in between crews that does a comprehensive cleaning for us.
Somewhere on Mars, you're not likely to do that.
You are correct. So they're going to have to learn. So hopefully their parents taught them well. So that's our medical workstation. You can see here, that's the little gurney that would pull out in the event that you needed it. Let's see, how did I make it work a second ago? There's the airlock. You can't really see it very well inside there. The all-purpose work table, unfortunately, is behind the lift. So there is an elevator, a lift that is inside the facility. Oopsie. And then there's like 5 pages up. There is a lift inside the core, the center of the facility. Crew members will usually only use the elevator if there's something really heavy and bulky that they have to get up and down the 2nd floor, because it's really, really slow and it's really kind of noisy and no one has enough patience at that point in time to do anything. And yes.
That brings up the obvious question, how do you compensate for 1G, not low G?
Could you repeat the question so that people online?
Okay, the question was, how do we compensate for 1G instead of low G? So there's no gravity influence here and here. There's just not. So we're not
there. You can just
yeah.
load it up.
Well, but yeah. So here you have to manually float it up, right? If you want it to go. Hopefully they're not tossing it from the bottom up to someone standing up top, because then that would be a safety hazard and we probably have to file a report, and no one wants to do that. So, so they usually just use a ladder. There is a ladder inside there, and they just go up and down that ladder the vast majority of the time. Okay, we'll just skip the rest of that. I think we saw almost everything. If you look over here, this little person in the blue is doing the robot activity. And then right next to her would be that 3D printer. And then of course, this is back in the day when they allowed us to have a door on the hygiene module, but it's not there, I promise you. So then this is the upstairs. I don't have a fancy little picture. You kind of saw some of it in the video. So upstairs, this is where they have their table. They have a table. They have some monitors there. They can watch TV, watch a movie, not TV, watch a movie with one another. They can eat their meals, etc. They have a little galley. They do have plumbed running water upstairs, very small capacity. So, you know, they do have to watch what they're using. They have a microwave, but there's no cold stowage inside of Hira. So everything is ready to eat. So think, you know, 45-day camping trip with nothing but dehydrated, ready to eat food. And you don't get the Dutch oven to bake anything on the campfire. Also up here is the vast majority of the simulated ECLIS system. We call it the habitat support system nowadays. We also have our exercise bike. So in the event that we schedule exercise regularly for the crew members, but sometimes a scientific protocol comes in that will drive that protocol for us. So we adapt as needed. We also have some free weights inside the habitat to do the resistance training. That was a huge lesson learned when we first started here back in 2014. Our very first crew didn't have any way to do resistance exercise. Now, granted, it was only a 7-day mission, but they felt the need. They needed more to do more than just the cycle we had. And so at the time, there wasn't any plumbed water inside of the HERA facility. And so we had stocked it with 3-gallon water jugs, right, to put on a water container. And lo and behold, here's the crew, got a jug in each hand, using it as weights to get their resistance exercise, which, you know, some people may not think is a big deal, but those of us who knew HERA knew that all the electrical systems were in the floorboard. So all we were envisioning was one of those jugs falling, breaking, spilling, and frying the entire facility. So we very quickly guided them to do something else. And then, you know, where there's a will, there's a way. The next thing they did was use the lift bar to do pull-ups. So that was a whole other thing we had to address as well. So just about every role we have in the analog environment is based on probably a fairly good story. So, and then from this level, there are crew quarters. So there's 2 ladders in either corner. I guess I could look here instead of there. You can't even see his way. So there's 2 ladders in either corner that you take up, and it'll access two bunks on each side. When we first started here, they were actually completely enclosed. So they actually had fabric kind of cushion quilted barrier that they could zip shut. And then it also had a big piece of, I don't know what, foam board that was there to help with the sound, you know, to help mute the sound. However, right about the time that human factors decided our facility was too big and too private, they said, well, let's see how important private crew quarters are. How important is that going to be for a future vehicle or habitat design? So they took all those walls down. So now we just have mesh netting up there. You might have seen it in the video earlier. So that's definitely a consideration as we're consenting subjects to let them know that privacy has been greatly reduced. So HERA mission design. We started in 2014. That's when we inherited the HERA. Well, we inherited HERA in 2013 and started our first mission in 2014. We decided we wanted to crawl before we walked, before we ran. So we slowly ramped up our studies to make sure we could do it right. So we did a 3-day engineering evaluation at the very beginning, and then shortly thereafter put in our first crew for 7 days straight. Then we went up to 14 days, 30 days, and then 45 days, which is where we are now. So we're taking you and 3 of your best friends you met roughly 2 weeks ago, putting you inside an environment for 45 days, shutting the door, not letting you talk to anyone but us and the doctors. Sound like fun?
You want to sign up?
Yeah. Now, back to the 0G versus 1G dichotomy. Have you tried to get any long-term space station crew to go in there and tell you the differences that they experience?
So we have,
subtle as they may be, but because of the
I know, I got you. She was there for all that, so she's trying to remind me. But so we haven't had any astronauts come in and actually participate in a HERA mission per se, but we have done 2 space weeks where we have had crew members come in and for 3 days long. I think they came in and they stayed for 3 days for kind of different reasons, not necessarily to help us with our platform as much as to help them learn to work together as a team and develop some of their soft skills that they otherwise miss in their normal training flow.
Yeah, but if the objective is like a Mars mission, where they're going to be in 0G
right.
essentially for 9 months or whatever.
Right. So this platform is not
like that.
Right. So this platform is not looking necessarily at the microgravity or altered gravity state. This platform is looking more at the human factors and behavioral health and performance type components.
A subtle human factor is low gravity or little gravity.
Right.
It seems like psychologically alone it might, after months or something, be not necessarily bad, but just different in subtle ways.
Well, I'm sure. Yeah, so absolutely.
You ought to interview the people that have been up there a year and see if they spend 30 days, if they notice any difference in psychology or whatever.
Well, I'm sure they have. So there's a lot of the same studies that are performed on station that they're performing in HERA. So they're able to, the researchers are able to look at that data that goes back and forth and crosses across. Yeah. So we are implementers. So we don't actually own or conduct any of the actual science. So we don't ever get any of those data results. We're at the mercy of the elements and their investigators to share that data back with us. So we all look forward to the investigators workshop every year. The HRP Human Research Program has a workshop every year where the investigators come back and tell us all about their findings. And that's when we start to learn, okay, are we really doing a good job at, the same type of stressors and activities and that the crew experiences in flight? I mean, are we validating, the findings? And so that's very interesting for us. So we do try our hardest for mission facility, granted, not without the altered state of gravity. So we have a flight-like timeline, not exactly the same look, but the same type of schedule, equipment, stowage, procedures. They have a lot of the same type of activities in flight that they do inside of here. Like I said before, there's no internet, there's no TV, they're completely cut off. So we take everything away from them before they go in. No one's allowed to have anything that can reach the internet that we don't control. So if an investigator has a survey or questionnaire that requires internet access or some type of activity that needs internet access, we literally whitelist those, and those are the only sites the crew members are allowed to go to. So for those of you that are addicted, no luck here. We have learned that where there is a will, there is a way. We've had many crew members try to figure out how to break that system. Sometimes they've been successful, sometimes they haven't, but with every attempt, we get a little bit smarter and prevent them from doing it the next time. We do have surveillance video and an audio system, so we do have them under surveillance 24/7. We've got 9 cameras inside the HERA, 4 in the core level downstairs, 4 in the upstairs livable space, 1 in the airlock. There are no cameras in the hygiene module. That's a little too much invasion on your privacy. And we do not have cameras in the sleep quarters. Right now, there are 2 cameras that kind of look at the sleep quarters, but they're not recorded and they're kind of fuzzed out. And that's mainly from a compliance standpoint, because the whole purpose of removing the wall from the sleep quarters is to reduce their privacy. And we don't want a subject to take a sheet or a towel or their clothes and start hanging them up and creating a private environment for themselves. So we mainly only have those cameras to maintain subject compliance.
Medical and medical.
If a medical emergency happens, we have a 24/7 doc that's on call that we call. Yep.
A doctor can go inside.
The doctor will start with a conversation with the subject, a private conversation with the subject to assess what is going on. And if needed, we will pull the subject out. To date, so we have done, this is our 4th, so 4 times 6. We've done 25 missions. And to date, we have only had to remove 1 crew member for illness. So we've got a pretty good track record. And that was actually early on in our studies. That was your first mission. See, it was all your fault, Lisa.
Instead of the human factors, people making all these assumptions about what's going to be flying. One is part of that. Don't they do anything in their job? It's like, how do we make it more amenable for them to have more privacy and make this better, rather than make assumptions that they're going to be restricted to this kind of level of no privacy for the duration of a mission?
So the question for those of you online was, human factors are looking at driving the requirements instead of responding to the requirements. And I think that that's just the age-old, I don't want to say problem, but challenge that we have faced between the human research side and the engineering side. I suspect that a lot of the engineering was done and performed without pulling in the human factor side of the house. So at this point, they were kind of looking at, what does the new vehicle look at? What is its capabilities and its amenities, and how can we structure these platforms to more align with those, so that we can get the research we need to address the problems that the astronaut might face in the future. So that's kind of where we are. So at some point, it'd be great if everyone was able to coordinate early enough to address those issues, but I'm not sure that we've quite gotten there yet. So their daily workload is very similar to flight. The investigators have their own tasks and activities that the crew members have to participate in as part of the science, but a lot of the science that we're doing, I said, is related with the behavioral health and performance group. So a lot of their activities are not necessarily an actual task, but it's more like a survey, a questionnaire, a journal entry, something like that. So then we need, as our team, will develop operational scenarios that will kind of drive the science that the scientists are looking to collect. And so we kind of do that in our operational tasks. Some of them are completely platform driven. Others are driven by the science. We have things like payload operations. We do PAO events. With the virtual reality, the MMSEV, that's a very important one for our investigators, because it is the only 4-person teamed performance task we have. Associated with that is that planetary geology that we have. So those would be those rock samples that we're collecting when we're on the surface. Housekeeping and maintenance. This is where they come in and they make sure that they're cleaning up after themselves because no one else is there. So they do have dishes, they do have laundry, they do have to keep their habitat clean. Phase duration of calm delay. So as we're approaching the moon, we do phase in a calm delay period and we phase back out as we return back home. And then we have tasks and timelines built with the realistic ambiguities and intermittent extended duty days and time pressure. So we build in some stressors to help drive the science and maintain that mission fidelity as we go along. So standardized conditions. So over there at the top is kind of an example of one of our timelines for the crew. I know it's kind of small. So not the same platform that they use for station, but it's very similar as far as how things are scheduled and the activities that are on that timeline. We try to develop realistic mission scenarios and a narrative. So once we say that, like right now we're going to Mars, Moon, Phobos, and then we try to keep anything else that we need to communicate to the crew about any happenings consistent with that same mission scenario. Oftentimes that mission scenario is driven by the science that's coming inside the habitat. Other times, if there's not a strong driver, we will stick with what we already have, or if we need to make changes, we can do so. We control the cabin air and temperature and humidity. We have a light dark cycle, so there's a standardized schedule that they use unless someone has a requirement that drives it otherwise. There's exercise requirements, like I said, those can change depending on the science that's coming inside the habitat. We have a food system and dietary conditions. So we do provide 3 meals a day and some snacks. Might not be exactly what they want to eat, and they are all very willing to share with us their thoughts on their food and snacks when they get out of their missions. But we do actually have a nutritionist that determines the caloric intake that's required for each one of our crew members, and she puts together a diet based on the same ratios that she would do for spaceflight. However, we're not getting food lab food, so it's not as, might not be as great as the astronauts are getting, but it's food and it's meeting all the nutritional requirements. Hot water and food warming only. That's it. You put it in a microwave or you heat it up with the hot water that we have inside the hab, and that's the extent of your meal prep. Some of the things are just plain ready to eat. You open the package and you eat it. So, like I said, 45-day camping trip without the benefit of the campfire.
Is all the food stored on board?
Yes.
Or they have a way of putting something?
No, so all the food is stored on board for the 45-day mission. So we get a list from the dietitian of what's needed to be purchased. We purchase it all. For 45 days, we were able to actually stow all of that food inside the hab. It helped a whole lot when they wanted to reduce our volume size because they made us put in a whole lot of storage bags and stuff. So we're able to unzip those and put some food in there. But if a situation were to evolve, these are humans after all, and we were on the ground and we're not in space. So if something were to happen, let's say a crew member was having an adverse reaction to one of the food items that's inside the hab, let's say, right? And it's going to have a negative impact on their overall nutrition throughout the study. Well, that's going to affect a lot of things. That's going to affect their performance on tasks. It's going to affect their mood, their morale, may and start impacting the remainder of the crew members that are in there as they're watching something happen to their crewmate. So at that point in time, when we start to realize there's an issue, we'll discuss it with our psychological support team and our medical support team. And if the decision is made, we will go procure whatever we need. And like I said, we will use that transfer station that I referred to earlier and pass in whatever is needed to maintain crew health.
And no napping is serious problem.
Pardon?
No napping is serious problem.
No napping. I
Is
can't.
it a serious problem?
Napping? Is that what
Yes,
he's saying?
no
Napping? No napping. No napping. It's not a serious problem. If we happen to see someone dozing off, MCC will just call down and wake them up, or have a crew member if it's not doing the job. So usually, napping is not as big of an issue in HERA because their timeline is so busy and packed with activities. However, when we were doing bed rest studies, there's also no napping allowed. That's a little more difficult because they are literally laying in bed all day long. Sometimes if there's not a busy schedule, they have a lot of downtime watching TVs or reading. So it was a little bit more of an issue then, but that's why we have subject monitors and, these subjects are watched 24/7. So the second someone starts to break the protocol or become non-compliant, we have someone that will intervene and correct the behavior. Yes, sir.
Have you run any of your subjects through a second expedition?
So in HERA, the question was asked if we've ever run a subject through more than one HERA campaign. So right now, we have not. We need the entire complement of science to overturn before we have a return subject come in for a HERA campaign, just because you don't want to collect the same data on the same subject. So to date, we have not. And we have had people switch platforms. So like HERA is an isolated, confined, and controlled environment. NEK, which I'll cover shortly after this in much less detail, they're not all going to be this involved. It's a longer duration, isolated, confined environment. So it's very similar to HERA, but a longer duration. And we have had someone participate in HERA and then go off and participate in NEK. When we did our bed rest studies, because those campaigns were very finite, we did actually have repeat subjects that came back for more than one bed rest campaign. Why you would ever want to participate in more than one 6-degree head down tilt for 90 days is beyond me. That's why I'm not a test subject. That's why I run the studies and don't participate. So,
But I could see how the psychological effect of knowing what you're signing up for would change the results.
Yes.
Through the second time.
right, yes. So when we first started here in the early days, one of our exclusion criteria was that you could not have had any previous analog experience coming in, because we didn't want you to have a preconceived idea or notion of what you were facing. Those early campaigns were very high on stressors. They were really looking at stressors. So we had built in a whole lot of stressors. So part of those stressors was the novelty of the environment that they were going to be in. So if you'd already participated in something similar, then you're already coming in with an advantage over all the rest of the subjects. And the only way we can get those investigators an N of 16, a true N of 16, is to control all the variables the best that we can. So our way of doing that was making sure no one had prior experience prior to coming into the facility. Yes.
Here again, if you're going eventually to Mars, 9 months of daylight. So light dark isn't exactly the right term. It's circadian rhythm.
Right.
Assume
Yes.
that you'd have to artificially create.
And there's going to be a study that we did in campaign 4 that looked at dynamic lighting situations and did a
It's going to be daylight.
and did, well, we didn't have daylight the entire time, but they did a partial sleep deprivation and looked at the effects of the lighting as a countermeasure to that fatigue. So they are looking at some of that. Again, we're the implementers. So until the scientist comes with the science driving the need to have to completely move to that scenario, we're not going to do it. So again, the mission scenario, I think we've talked about this quite a bit. So here are just some pictures. So that's the one in the middle is what the virtual reality guys are seeing when they're out on their little virtual reality EVA. And then the other two pictures would be the pilot, co-pilot that are driving their vehicle. So these, like I said, this is a big bang for the buck activity for all of our investigators who are looking at performance data. It is the one, pretty much the only time that we have all 4 crew members participating in the same task with the same performance measures. Crew selection, how do we get these crew members? So every mission has 4 prime. We say occasionally backup. Okay, we always want backups. We always want 2 backups for every 4-person crew. Believe it or not, I think that this mission we have right now is the first time we've ever used both backups. So if we wouldn't have had both backups, we would have been in trouble. So backups are always good to have, because if you don't have one and something happens to one of your crew members, then you have to scrub your mission and you have to start all over again, which is a huge, at times, cost impact, but definitely a huge schedule impact, not just for our team, but for the elements and the investigators as well who are working under funded grants. Yes, sir.
Does the backup have to enter at the beginning and say the 45 days, or can a backup come in the middle of a mission?
So the backup is only a viable backup in the pre-mission phase. So when they're here for the 16 days for baseline data collection and training, that's the only time they can step in. We have to start a mission with 4 people, but we can end a mission with 3.
Okay.
So, and of course, we all know
you might lose somebody on a mission.
You might lose somebody on a mission. Absolutely. And then we would not replace them, because then that disrupts the entire team dynamic and everything else. So the data would not be viable. So
That's your list.
yeah.
Don't put them in the rubber grave.
Yeah. As I mentioned before, our goal is always 50-50 male-female ratio. That is true for all analogs that we participate in. So all of the platforms have a 50-50. We strive for that. I think it'd be case by case if we ever entered a situation where we weren't going to reach that. I think, that's when the statistics start coming in and they start, weighing it, saying, how valid would be the science? How close can you cut that? Age is 30 to 55 years. And HERA maximum height is 6'2", just because the facility can't tolerate anything else. You have to have an advanced STEM degree or equivalent military or civilian experience, and you have to demonstrate professional technical skills. And your motivation and your work ethic kind of has to align with astronaut-like. That's the favorite requirement of every investigator when we're asking for their inclusion and exclusion criteria, is astronaut-like. To date, and I've been in analogs for almost 18 years now, no one can tell me what astronaut like is. And so
What
What is STEM?
STEM is science, technology, engineering, and math. So you have to come from a science, technology, engineering, or math background. And you have to have done something relevant in that field recently. It's not like you can go get your biology degree, but then go be an artist all your life because you decided you liked, sitting in the French Riviera or painting more than you like biology, and then expect to come in because you've had no practical experience. You're not working in your field. Your mind is not driven that way. So we're looking for folks that don't only have the educational background and experience, but they need that experience as well. You can't just come in. Yes, ma'am.
What is the age limitation?
The age limitation sometimes varies depending on the platform. When we first started HERA, we were using the same age range that we were using for our bed rest studies, which I think I think bed rest started, see, Dr. Shackelford's not probably gonna remember either. I think bed rest started maybe at 24, and when we first started HERA, we started at 26 as our lower limit. And then as we first started getting those first results back from the labs, we're like, okay, we're really not getting the same level of life experience and maturity that we would expect to see in an astronaut. Participating in one of our studies. So they bumped it to the 30. And so they're really trying to kind of grab that range of life experience and maturity that an astronaut candidate would have. So they bumped the age up a little bit on us. You do? Yes.
By the lack of maturity, you mean lack of interpersonal skills.
Interpersonal, yeah, lack of maturity, interpersonal skills, absolutely. And life, yes.
Are you aware of the many studies that were done about looking at the optimum crew size for various intense or dangerous missions? It doesn't have to be spaceflight, it can be a walk across the desert, but the results of those studies says you always have to have an odd number in the crew size. Are you aware of those studies?
I am. So the question was if I was aware of previous studies dictating crew size for various activities. I am not personally aware of those studies. I would expect that the element scientists who are proposing the science and the elements who are directing and overseeing that are aware. At this point, I'm not sure that that is a critical component of the research they're trying to gather, because right now they're really kind of looking at the risks and gaps that the Human Research Program has identified as challenges and risks to the future, Moon to Mars mission. And so those are the risks and gaps they are focused on. So I can't speak as to whether or not, there's probably a couple people online that could, but I cannot speak to whether or not those have been taken into consideration.
People should do a little bit of research on that because they concluded that you would always have a rivalry between the top two qualified people if it was an even number.
And we have seen not necessarily a rivalry per se. We have definitely seen crews where certain crew members bond more than other crew members. I will tell you that when we are doing our subject selection for our crews, we are not looking for a crew of 4 that's going to be best friends for life. We are looking for a crew of 4 that can successfully reach the goals and complete the mission. So I don't want to say, be unkind and say I could care less, couldn't care less if you like each other, but we just want you to be successful, and sometimes you see that division in a crew. Sometimes we have seen crews come out and they have remained best friends and have stayed in touch over the years. We actually even have a HERA crew alumni group that all get together and still talk to each other. But then there are UC crews that come out and it's very clearly that, 2 or 3 of them are really close and maybe the other one's an odd man out. So we have definitely observed that from our standpoint, but not something that we have implemented and moved forward on. Yes.
Have those Mars Society analogs done in the Arctic done any good versus real data? And do you have any feedback?
So we do have a few studies that go, this is a question about the Antarctic. That'll be a slide later. Nowhere near as much detail as HERA, like I said before, because we do everything with HERA. So we know this analog very intimately. But we have done a few research studies. HRP has sponsored some studies down on the ice. And I don't really have any firsthand knowledge of the results they're getting back, but we're very limited. So whereas in HERA and like NEK and even in the bed rest studies, we're doing these large integrated studies, collecting a lot of data. So we're integrating all these investigators on a non-interference basis. The ICE is kind of managed differently. They allow 1 or 2 research protocols to come in. The people who are participating get to pick and choose what they want to participate in. And then no one is down there controlling any of the conditions. Right.
Mars Society feedback.
Well, not Mars Society, no. It's McMurdo. Yeah.
So we don't.
Yeah, we don't deal with them. Our crew members do have to be medically qualified, so they do go through the same, some of the same screening procedures. So it's a modified class 3 flight physical. They do have to pass that. There's also psychological assessment that they have to complete before coming in, that they're looking at astronaut-like features, and you'd have to ask our psychologist what she's using for that basis, but she has figured out a way, because she gives us a ranking every time. And the resilience factors, because that's a big thing that they're studying, is that resilience. So like I've said, I think numerous times, probably don't need me to repeat it, behavioral health and performance is one of our biggest customers for this platform, just because there are so many questions and so many aspects that need to be answered. So you're looking at your crew hierarchy. It's probably where a lot of that crew size will come in. Team cohesion, stress, cultural factors, etc. The cultural factors play a big part, and we're just now starting to touch on that. We were limited with what we could do with cultural factors here in the US. So we actually, our other isolated environment was in Moscow. So we were able to get some cultural factor research done over there. But believe it or not, our next campaign is going to have a UAE member. So we are slowly but surely starting to bring in that international component over here to JSC. We do look at sleep and circadian issues and isolation confinement, as well as the drivers for the 45 days requirement. They were our main driver for that. That apparently is perfect for the teaming, to watch the team form, fall, and rebuild. Human systems integration, this is your human factor. So these guys are looking at comm delay, crew autonomy. That's been a big thing for us. That was a new thing for us for this campaign, to learn how to not be as controlling with the crew and give them a little autonomy. So they've been doing some self-scheduling, and some other procedural tasks haven't involved us, butting into their business as much as we used to. We kind of give them a little bit of freedom there. They have their VA virtual assistant tools that they've been using in this as well. So they're trying to learn some trust in technology. And then we, of course, controlled environmental conditions, such as their usable volume and their privacy, as we've discussed before. We do have mission enabling capabilities validations. So, food, we've done a couple of food studies, the scheduling tools we're looking at, the procedures and how they need to work and operate. And of course, our operational concepts we're trying to validate as we go along. And then in the future, exploration medical capabilities. So telemedicine operations are going to become increasingly important as we move towards these longer duration and further away missions. They haven't participated a whole lot to date, but I do know for a fact that they are pretty quickly coming up on our horizon with some of their tools. So this is where the notes would have been really nice. But anyway, so we did do a lighting study. We did this in campaign 4. So they did have a modified sleep schedule. So for 5 days a week, they only got 5 hours of sleep. For 2 days a week, they could recover and have 8 hours of sleep. And the main goal here was to see if the lighting could act as a countermeasure. So we had the blue hue daytime light, and then at night we turned it more to the red. And we did actually deprive them of caffeine. Well, I don't want to say deprived. In the end, we had to allow caffeine, but it was strictly regulated, and they were only allowed to drink, I think, 2 6, maybe 8 ounce cups over in like a 2-hour period, and that was it. They were restricted on their caffeine intake. And this was kind of in combination with the same experiment that we're doing on station. So they were replacing the lights on station just one by one, so it wasn't as consistent. It was an inconsistent lighting pattern, but in Hero, we were able to replace all our lights, so we had a more consistent system, and they were able to look at whether or not the blue light was helping with the fatigue that they were seeing from the sleep deprivation, as well as, improving some of the performance in that sleep deprivation phase. And so, lo and behold, they were able to validate. I think a lot of us already know this. It's been generally accepted that the blue light helps. They've actually even used the blue lights in ISS MCC for the longer, 24/7 shift support. And seen good results. So the biomarkers of the circadian rhythms were more consistent, self-reported better alignment between time and circadian phases, and it improved abstract reasoning test performance. So definitely had positive results from that lighting study. And then food. Food is always a huge issue. So I think it was in the same campaign, or maybe it was campaign 5. I think it was campaign 4. We had a meal replacement bar. So when we get into these Artemis missions, the vehicle size is going to be limited, as well as longer and more frequent EVA activities. And so it takes a lot of calories to make your way through an EVA. So you can't pack a whole lot of food that they can just sit down and have this huge meal before they go, because space and volume are limited. So they came up with these food bars. So they're calorically dense food bars. You want to get as many calories as you can into them before they don the masks for pre-breathe protocol and don the suits to go out on their EVA. And so these were 750 calories per bar that they were expected to eat in the first 15 days of our study. They ate them daily every morning, and then the last 15 days only every 3 days. So they kind of went to a more intermittent schedule. I'd love to tell you it was a wonderful success, but it really wasn't, because food is the thing that drives us all, right? And think about it when you're trying to diet versus when you can have, dessert after dinner, right? Or the roll on the table. Yes.
I remember a conversation about the amount of sugar per bar, because that was the way to get concentrated energy into the small bars. You know how much sugar is in a bar?
I probably have that data somewhere in my computer, but I do not know it off the top of my head. Lisa, do you remember?
I don't remember.
Huh?
Repeat the question.
Oh, I'm sorry. The question was asked whether or not we knew the amount of sugar that was contained in the bars, because that was a big talking point as they were doing development. So I don't quite remember, and well, it's not like I can turn them on. Don't know if anyone.
So I remember that the amount of sugar and the type of sugar in the bars exceeded what the recommendation was coming from your office. And so that was a real huge discussion point, and ultimately we allowed the experiment to proceed. But I think that's what resulted in the modification of how many bars they ate over the entire duration of the mission. Lori, back to you.
Okay, I know. I'm sorry. My son is, apologies. My son is at tutorials. Grandparents were supposed to pick him up since I was doing this, and no one's there. So I'm trying to tell him to politely call his parents and grandparents.
From the bond stem product, you get advanced glycation end products when you have too high of a sugar load per day, and it also causes the liver to go into fatty changes. The recommendation is that fructose not exceed 50 grams per day. That recommendation is based upon the fructose action on the liver is very similar to alcohol action. No one knows how much fructose is too much, but 50 grams is a different limit on alcohol. So the last I've seen, 50 grams of fructose a day, and sucrose is of course half fructose, half glucose. Glucose is not very sweet. Fructose is usually used to make things palatable.
Right.
But anyway, that's just an aside there, because the advanced glycation end products can negatively affect bone.
Okay, yes, sir.
What about protein requirements?
So they go off the same fat protein carbohydrate ratio that they do for the flight crew. So it is monitored by the nutritionist. So these meal replacement bars were actually developed and built by PIs that are in our nutrition lab. So it was a study that was internal to JSC that was participating in this. So as you can see, the results in the end resulted in less caloric intake and a mild weight loss. It was greater. It was seen mostly with the daily supplementation over the intermittent supplementation. We saw some morale decrements. A lot of the drivers, when they came back, was the taste, texture. There was limited variety, and the duration and frequency in which they had to consume the bars. So in the grand scheme of things, sounds like there needs to be a little bit more work in order to make this a feasible option for crews in the future. But it was worth running the study through. I know that CHAPIA, which is a platform that HRP is not heavily involved in with right now, is getting ready to kick off a 1-year-long integrated food system and nutrition study. So hopefully they will glean more information and data from that study.
Some alcohol is permitted.
Alcohol is not permitted for our crew members now. Well, not our Russians. You can't. Yes, sir.
You just mentioned that there was not a connection with their CHAPIA.
Not a direct connection, no. We do not own and operate that platform.
Oh, fair enough. Is there communication or?
Their communication, yes. Lessons learned, shared, yes, since they're a new platform standing up, but we are not actively involved in any of their scientific goals and procedures. So we're helping them from an operational standpoint where needed. Outside of that, we're 2 different funding organizations, 2 different goals and objectives. Some of the investigations that are in HERA might have some crossover if they've worked, but we are not, analogs, ROI analogs are not directly involved.
So 2 silos, is that what you're saying?
Well, with a bunch of windows and some bridges, but yeah.
What about the biggest psychological factor? These people are actually 35 million miles from Earth, and there's no way to open the door and get out if they have to. I mean, that's got to be the biggest.
And that's one of the things that So he was asking about the biggest psychological factor when you're, really far on your way to Mars and you're just fed up because you've been in there for 6 months and you want to open the door and jump out. So that's where that extreme environment, those extreme environment platforms come in. Hera obviously is not extreme. Everyone who walks into here really knows if, in the back of their mind that they can open the door, step outside and leave if they want to. If you're doing a study in the Arctic, maybe not so much. If you're not prepared for that, you're going to freeze to death. If you're in Nemo, you're going to drown. If you're in the parabolic flight and open the door to the plane, unless you have a parachute, your chances aren't so good.
You'll step out, breathe the air, you're an Arctic explorer.
Right. So I'm sure that the investigator, I know we're running way over. I'm sorry. So this might just be Hera and not anything else.
If I can ask everybody to hold your questions, let Lori get through the rest of her slides and then we'll get back to everybody's questions. Yeah, she's got more to come.
More to come. Anyway, so this is just a list, and I won't go through these since we're running short on time, of some other tools that we have developed because from the analog research that we're doing, that we're still kind of in the works of developing and validating as we go along. So we're looking at, cognition, stress, team dynamics, habitability and acceptability for space flight, habitats, medication tracking and inventory, those types of things. So this is the NEK. So we've been talking a lot about HERA. So NEK, I'm not going to say that long word. I don't even know how to start to say that long word, is located in Moscow. And this is an isolated, confined, and controlled environment, extremely similar to HERA facility, except that, like I said before, you could have the same, you could have international participants. It's much larger, as you can see. It's more space station-like than HERA was, as more of a little capsule. But these were long duration. So the first campaign that we did in here was 4 months long. The second mission we did in here was 8 months long. They have 6 crew members instead of 4. And they're able to accommodate a whole lot more studies. For HERA, I think we've maxed out at 22 investigators over the 45 days. In NEK, with all of the international studies that are coming in, we only had 9 out of 70 that were funded by HRP. So they were able to do a whole lot more. Granted, maybe not as involved when you're looking at that volume and a lot of data sharing, but still they were able to get a lot of science back. So they had the same exact mission fidelity list as the things that we do inside of HERA. Some of the differences, the main differences is the interior hab design. It's much larger. If you're, remember the 70s, there's wood paneling inside. That's not exactly going to be flight-like. MCC is a lot less involved in Moscow in the NEK than it is at HERA. And they are a pressurized environment. So HERA is an open environment, NEK is a closed environment. So that's, they're extremely isolated from all the outside conditions. HERA, the humidity changes in the summer is going to be, you're going to feel it inside the HERA facility. And their food system, instead of the camping style, dehydrated, ready to eat, they were more canned, pureed, like packaged foods. And they were allowed to experiment with some baking bread. So maybe they were a little happier. Apparently, when some of the international partners were able to send in food supplies, they would get really excited because they were like treats. We don't really get to treat our HERA subjects. So, but they're looking at pretty much all the same things. And we are looking at comparing. So that's when a lot of that comparison between your short duration, your long duration starts to come in to look at the differences between your 8-month mission versus your 45-day or 30-day mission. So the Antarctic stations, we briefly touched on this. We do have some experiments that go to the ice. McMurdo is a very big, large environment with up to 1,000 participants in the summer, 100 in the winter. Palmer, a lot smaller, as is Amsden Scott. There's no psychological screening for the larger one, but there are in some of the others, and depending on when they run, varies between each of the platforms as well. This goes till 4, right? Yeah.
Well, with the Q&A, yeah. Whenever you're done.
Right. So we have been doing some research. Like I said, we don't do as much research in the Antarctic station because they only allow 1 or 2 investigators to come because they have investigators coming from all over the world. So there's not as many open spots and we don't run it. So we can't just say, oh, you got to let us in. Right. So we have done some virtual reality testing there. So there's been some hybrid training. So exercise augmentation with VR goggles. So it's like, do you exercise better and perform better? If you have in a VR environment. We've done some VR sensory simulation for relaxation and therapeutic. There's been some crop growth. So veggie on ice, this is the same veggie experiment that's on station. So we've got some crossover experiments going on there. And then there's parabolic flight. So this is where gravity, altered gravity starts to come in. However, you only get 20 to 30 seconds of it at a time because it's only in that parabola as you go. We've done one parabolic flight actually recently last year, and we're getting ready to kick off another one, but this will be partial gravity. So they're going to go, besides just doing 0G, they're going to do 25, 50, and 75%. And so we'll see how that goes. But these experiments are very well controlled. We've been doing parabolic flight for years at NASA. We used to do it with our own plane here. Now we have to go to Bordeaux, France. Darn it. So they're looking at physiology, sensory motor function, and operational performance. And like I said, everything, all the subjects recruitment is science driven. We do have the advantage for this next flight that we have enough HRP investigators that we're actually have the entire flight. So all of HRP science will be performed on our next one this June. And then NVHAB. So we did shut down our facility at UTMB Galveston and towards the tail end of 2013. At the time, it was for two reasons. One, we didn't really think we had a whole lot of bed rest left to do. And two, if we did have bed rest that we were going to move forward with, we needed to be able to control the environment, which we couldn't do. We couldn't have a contained environment inside their facility. So I'm sure a lot of negotiations happened way above my pay grade, and we landed at the NVHAB facility, which is run by the German Space Agency in Cologne, Germany. And they were able to simulate the space flight conditions. So they did an altered bed rest itself is an altered gravity because it's that 6-degree head down tilt. So even though you're not technically in an altered gravity environment, your body thinks you are. You're having the same physiological response to the altered posture. And then for one of the studies, we actually elevated the CO2 concentration inside their environment. And so we did one study for 30 days looking there. So NVHAB is a lot nicer to their subjects. Their max right now is 60 days. So they go from 30 to 60, whereas we went up to 90 and in Galveston. They are able to do 12 subjects at the same time. So they have a little bit of different, they roll all 12 in 2 at a time until they all 12 get in, and then they let them go. They do have an MRI, lab and testing support, and a short arm centrifuge that they're able to conduct all the testing still and maintain that 6-degree head down tilt for their subjects. So that's very beneficial for us. So we're using bed rest a lot right now to do the characterization of the SANS condition. Always have been using it to look at bone and cardiovascular, starting to look at more of that cognitive sensory-motor, and more cognitive, but definitely the sensory-motor or muscle risks, because at some point you're going to have to know how well is a crew member going to perform when they come out of that capsule after being in that microgravity environment for a period of time. And they're getting ready to finally build a Mars simulator right outside the NVHAB facility. So we're really hoping one of these days we will get a science experiment where we have them down at -6 for 60 days. And the first time they stand up is when they have to get out of their capsule and do a performance task. So that'll be really interesting science if we get there. And of course, we do countermeasure testing, artificial gravity. We have spun people. We did that at UTMB Galveston. We're also doing it here at NVHAB. Oh, SANS. I don't know. This is the vision problem. I can't think of the acronym right here. Neuroocular syndrome. Sorry. Anyway, so I guess we can stop and because we need time for questions. 15 minutes for questions, or I can quickly go through. Yeah, we'll just stop.
What if you pay these people for these bed studies to lay down for 60 days?
So compensation is pretty tricky. So when it comes to the IRB, oh, where do you find them? I thought I said, where do you pay them? Yeah. So for the bed rest, both of them. So for the bed rest, for any of the studies, we just send out a general recruitment announcement, and you just recruit from the general population, usually. We found when we were doing the bed rest studies in Galveston that there's a whole, believe it or not, network of people who just want to be test subjects. Who knew? When we were doing the studies in Galveston, we were really challenged with finding quality people and the right kinds of people that we wanted to participate in. So we actually spent a whole lot of time and effort doing market analysis and research and bringing on folks to help us kind of streamline the type of people we wanted and the avenues that would be the most successful for us to recruit the type of people we were looking for. But it's just a general solicitation that goes out. They apply. If they meet the inclusion-exclusion criteria, then we bring them on. As far as compensation, that will vary based on your study. So there's no law that says you have to pay a test subject, but if you want a test subject to come and participate in your study and stay and give you good results, it probably works to your benefit to do so. But it can't be any amount that would be considered coercive, right? You can't, make it such a good deal that someone feels obligated to say yes, right? So we pay our subjects $10 an hour for every wake hour we have them scheduled. So in the grand scheme, not a whole lot of money. Any other questions?
Yeah. Do we have any questions from anybody online? Just unmute and ask. Looks like we've lost a few people. All right. Any questions from folks in the room? Stokes.
Do you purposely give scenarios that cause the crew to have conflict?
We didn't intentionally give scenarios. I'll repeat the question. He asked if we intentionally gave scenarios that caused the crew to have a conflict. We didn't necessarily give them a scenario that we knew would put crew member A against crew member B. We did, however, develop scenarios that would provide additional stressors above and beyond a normal workday activity. And then, of course, the research and this, the data then at that point is what type of conflict did it create within the crew, and what type of steps, mitigation strategies did they use to resolve that conflict, and how resilient were they at bouncing back to their nominal state after that conflict. So that's the research data. So that's part of our team's job, is when we get those requirements from that investigator and they need a scenario like that, it's our team's job to go off and figure out, okay, what type of scenario can we create that will drive the science that this investigator is looking for?
You're stressing one, and give them some kids.
Because that would stress, he asked if we want to stress them, why not give them some kids? That would also stress MCC, and we like our people. So
Are any U.S. investigators involved with DLR facility?
absolutely. So the question was if any U.S. investigators are involved in DLR. Yes. So HRP has funded. So that's all the studies we're doing there. So if HRP is funding U.S. investigators to participate over at the DLR facility, absolutely. And then we integrate. Sometimes they have, well, all the time, because they're DLR, have science that they want to come in and piggyback. And so we still integrate those internationals with our HRP science, with HRP taking the forefront of requirements. Yes.
The bed rest people, do they get any exercise? Do they get any time they're not laying down?
The question is, they get any exercise? So depending on the study, we did have a study where they were doing exercise in the -6 degree head down tilt position. So we actually had a vertical treadmill that was installed. However, if there's not an exercise protocol, so the crew, they don't get out of bed at all the entire time. I mean, not out of that 6 degree head down tilt configuration at any time.
Not even go to the rest?
Not even to the restroom, not even a shower. Everything is done in the bed or on a head down gurney. But we did have, to help alleviate like bed sores and like muscle cramping. So when we did the bed rest studies in Galveston, we did have stretching exercises. They performed both in the morning and in the evening. And then we had a physiotherapist that would come in every other day to provide physiotherapy, massage therapy to mitigate any potential for bed sores and or blood clots. And then we had our medical staff that checked on them regularly, and attending physician to make sure everything was okay.
They have the same thing at NVHAP.
Huh?
They have the same thing.
They have the same thing at NVHAP. Absolutely. They don't do the stretching now, but they do the same physiotherapy. Yes.
Why is it that now we, NASA has to go to Germany and France for zero-G flights and these tilt studies? And we don't have any of those facilities in this country anymore. We've given all that capability up.
So the question is, why are we going international for some of our platforms?
These countries don't even have a spaceflight program.
Right. The question is why we're going internationally for some of our platforms. So we did away with our the Vomit Comet. I don't really know what it was called because I wasn't involved. The Vomit Comet was decommissioned a number of years ago. So we no longer had an in-house capability to do the parabolic flights. The provider that is here in the US that we have looked at, we did extensive research and comparability and realized they were not as controlled of parabolas as we needed to drive to result in good science. Compared to the Novaspace platform in Bordeaux, was much higher fidelity, much more controlled, and gave us better science return. So that decision at that point in time was made to go there. As far as
looking up there for 20 years, that's the best.
Yeah.
Simulation.
As far as the bed rest facility, like I said at the time, the first study when we went back into the bed rest studies was that CO2 increased volume, CO2 concentration. UTMB, Galveston, there was no way to implement that condition there. There was just no way. We looked at all kinds of things like little tins that we could put in and zip the control. There was just no way to maintain a steady flow. to my knowledge, there wasn't another facility that could accommodate that condition for the duration and for the number of people we need to have in that condition. NVHAB was fairly new at the time. I don't think it was very old at that time. And they had built that facility with that capability in it when they built the facility. So it was kind of an easy decision at that point. We have been looking to see if there's other domestic platforms that can provide bed rest, and we've asked for multiple RFIs, to come in, and we've looked at them. To date, we have not found one that can meet all of our requirements. I know there are folks out there working on it. They're working closely with the team to see what NASA's requirements are for those types of studies, to see what they can do potentially in the future.
Just interesting if these other countries don't have manned spaceflight programs. They have these facilities.
Right.
We got policy.
Yes.
On the high CO2 test, how high? I
It's
mean,
5%.
Are you talking about 5,000?
6? I thought it was 5. That was 5. All right, between 5 and 6, because she and I we'll say 5.5, because since we
5,000, 6,000?
percent increase. Yeah.
What's that add up to part for me?
I have.
I don't recall.
Yeah.
That doesn't sound like a lot.
It is a lot.
It is for atmosphere.
Have you had any crews? Apollo 7 crew gave a lot of trouble.
So trouble, yes. Mutiny per se, no. There have definitely been activities that have occurred inside the HAB that have required us to make rules for following missions. There are definitely crews that have been there that have caused us to do a lot more housekeeping and maintenance activities after they have left, but just point blank cutting us off and walking out and not listening to us, we have not incurred that yet. So
I recall a walk with a young physician female.
we all recall, yes. We'll just leave it at that.
She just was practicing medicine, not to contact the doctor. And
So
it wasn't anything nefarious. She shouldn't have been doing that because she's not licensed in Texas and she didn't have a background to be making decisions. And that's why we have a doctor on call. And they can direct anyone inside there that's got medical training. That's better because they can direct them. But if you have someone who can't be directed, it's an issue.
When you're talking about Harvey.
do you want to talk about Harvey? I can talk about Harvey. We can talk about hurricanes in general. So obviously, we had our bed rest facility at the UTMB Galveston. All of our subjects are in a deconditioned state, depending on what phase of the study that they're in. So definitely hurricanes were of great concern to our team because we often, year round, we ran these studies. So figuring out how to evacuate and safely evacuate up to 12 subjects, as we ran 10 subjects at a time became a challenge. And we did have to evacuate. I think we evacuated crew twice in the grand scheme of bed rest. One time a number of them were fairly deconditioned. It involves an ambulance transport, which of course is tricky. It's great. Every ambulance company will set up a contract with you when it's like today. Trying to find an ambulance and to follow through on that contract when there's a hurricane coming and everyone is trying to evacuate and get sick people out of the harm's way became a challenge. And we did actually successfully evacuate all of our crew members, subjects at that time, up towards Bastrop, Austin area. And we did actually have a reconditioning therapist that was able to meet them up there and recondition our subjects. So we have had to terminate a couple of our bed rest studies. As far as Harvey, we did have a mission going on at the time that Harvey hit here. We had a crew in, they were about midpoint of a 45-day mission, crew of 4. One of them was local. So of course, as the news is coming in, very concerned about their family, ensuring that we're in contact with them and they're taking care of themselves. We might have been able to eke our way through Harvey. Maybe, I don't know. They were there when the storm hit. The problem came when the following morning we could not get core personnel staff to the facility to support the crew when they're awake. So the operational paradigm for HERA is when the crew is awake, we have core personnel there to attend to their needs and watch over them, and because we're there overseeing the scientific protocols. But when the crew is sleeping, We just have subject monitors who come in who don't know the ins and outs of all of our emergency procedures, all of our, operational paradigms, our rules, and science activities. So, we wake up that morning, I don't even think it was quite morning yet when all the phone calls started, and could not get crew on site, the personnel on site to support the crew. And at that point in time, we made the call to evacuate the crew. We evacuated them, unfortunately, to the greater Nassau Bay area, which was a brilliant move on our part. And they were fine for what, a day, 2 days, until the water, was it the water that went out? They lost water in those facilities. And so then we had to scramble yet again. And at that point, we transferred them to downtown Houston. But all the crew made it out. They were fine. No one spoke ill. They were all extremely disappointed that they were not able to finish their mission, because most of the people who, volunteer to participate in these types of things are very interested in the science, very vested in what we were trying to accomplish. And so they were extremely disappointed of having lost that opportunity. In the end, 23 days of a 45-day mission wasn't enough data to give our investigators what they needed to have to answer their questions. So we did actually have to implement our only to date 5th mission of a campaign. And campaign 4 went on for quite a while. Not nearly as long as campaign 6, which we kicked off integration and implementation before the pandemic and didn't get to start cruise till middle of pandemic. Yes, sir.
Lorrie, I probably didn't know him. What area was your father in?
He was an engineer for life sciences. His name was Lorrie Primeaux. Okay. So he started mid-60s, retired in 95. Many people, I don't see any of the names on here, but my first, just an interesting story in case you want to know, my very first week at NASA started with everyone I met, shook hands with, said, "Oh, I worked with your father. Oh, I worked with your father. Oh, I knew your father." And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, if he wasn't a very nice guy, this isn't going to bode well for me. So that, that started on a Monday. That Thursday, so I've already, gone through the whole world knows my dad, and I don't know what that means for me. That Thursday, I was told that the Biological Systems Office had no money, and they didn't know what they were going to do about it. In true NASA form, it took them almost 2 full years before they realized they really didn't have any money and laid us all off, which is how I landed in analogs at that point in time. So, any other questions? I think you're good.
All right. Thank you very much, Lorrie. Really appreciate your time, and thanks to everybody who's still online. I know it was a little bit challenging here, but I'd like to thank you personally, Lorrie, not only for putting up with me for all those many years as part of the Analogs team, but I have just a tiny little memento for you to make all of our coworkers, former coworkers for me, jealous.
I think there's
okay.
one on the line.
All right, so I think that is going to conclude our presentation for today. Just a reminder, this has been recorded, so everything that you said that the microphone can pick up has now been recorded for all time. The recording will be available on the NAL website for members only in the not too distant future. Usually takes us a couple of days. And our next meeting, our next first Thursday is going to be April 6th. And I'll have more information about that program. I can't tell you just yet. It's a secret. So as soon as that information becomes available, I'll share it with you. So at this point, I'm going to stop recording. And again, I do appreciate everybody being online today.